The stage manager had been working venues like this one for long enough that the backstage encounters between prominent figures were not, to her, events that required any particular attention. She had been in enough corridors, at the end of enough shows, when enough recognizable names had moved through the same small spaces, to have developed the professional relationship to celebrity proximity that the work required. Present, but not intrusive. Aware, but not watching. Available, but invisible, in the way that good production people are always invisible. She was doing her job. She happened to be close enough to see. What she saw was this. Katt Williams and Martin Lawrence, in a backstage corridor at the end of a shared evening, occupying the same narrow space at the same time, and the exchange that took place between them in those several minutes being something that she has not found a way to describe concisely in the years since. To understand why the moment registered the way it did, it helps to understand who Martin Lawrence was in the landscape of American comedy, and what it meant to be Katt Williams in that landscape at the same time. Martin Lawrence had built his presence in American comedy through a path that moved faster than most careers move and reached a higher altitude than most careers reach. He had come through the stand-up circuit in the late 1980s, developed a voice that was direct and physical and deeply connected to his specific cultural experience, and transitioned into television with a show that bore his name and that, at its peak, was one of the most watched programs on American television. He had made films. He had sold out tours. He had become, by the time his career entered its most visible phase in the 1990s, one of the most commercially successful comedians in America, the kind of name whose recognition extended well past the comedy world into the general culture. The stage manager has described the mechanics of how the encounter happened, without being able to say with any precision why it took the shape it did. Both men were backstage at the same venue, for reasons that were independently valid. The venue was the kind of space that hosted multiple events and multiple performers in proximity. And the backstage areas of such spaces have a habit of producing unexpected proximity between people who would not otherwise occupy the same corridor at the same time. They found themselves there. They found themselves talking. What she noticed first, and what she has returned to most consistently in her descriptions of the exchange, was the absence of the particular social performance that accompanies most encounters between prominent people in shared professional spaces. The careful mutual acknowledgement of status, the professional warmth that is extended without necessarily being felt, the brief and properly calibrated exchange that allows both parties to move on having demonstrated appropriate regard. None of that. What she saw instead was two people in an actual conversation, the particular quality of attention that each person brings when they are genuinely interested in what the other person is saying, rather than managing the social requirements of the encounter. At some point in the exchange, Martin Lawrence said something to Katt Williams that the stage manager could not hear clearly from where she was standing. The corridor was not silent, and she was not positioned to hear every word. What she could hear, and what she has described consistently, was the quality of what was said rather than the content. A directness that indicated it was not a general or professional statement, but something specific, something that required the speaker to have been paying the particular attention to the other person's work that you pay when you are evaluating it, rather than simply encountering it. And the response it produced from Katt Williams was what she has been trying to describe accurately in the years since. Not surprise, not the gratified social response that a compliment produces, something more private and more specific than either of those things. The particular stillness of someone who has just heard something said about their work by someone who could only have said it by understanding it. What made Martin Lawrence's career significant was not simply its scale, though the scale was real. It was the specific form that the scale took. He had built his connection to audiences through a style of comedy that was grounded in the kind of observation that comes from a particular experience of American life, the experience of growing up black in America in a specific time and place, navigating a specific set of social expectations and contradictions, finding in those contradictions the material for a voice that was simultaneously deeply personal and broadly recognizable. His comedy worked because it was honest in the specific way that only comedy that comes from a real place can be honest. The kind where the audience recognizes something they know from the inside, rather than something they've been told about from the outside. By the early 2000s, his career had moved through its most intensely visible phase, and was in a period of reconsolidation. The particular moment that long careers go through when the initial peak of visibility begins to settle into something more durable. When the question shifts from how much can be built in how short a time to how the thing that has been built is maintained and extended over a longer arc. He was still one of the most recognized names in comedy. He still carried the particular weight that a decade of sustained success at the highest level produces. Katt Williams, during the same period, was in a different kind of moment, a career in the process of its most significant acceleration. The stand-up work that had been developing through years on the circuit was beginning to reach audiences beyond the circuit, and the specific qualities that had made him a name among comedians before he was a name among general audiences were now producing a wider recognition. He was, in the particular way that careers have of suddenly becoming visible all at once after years of building in rooms that didn't produce visibility, arriving. Two careers at different points in the same arc, one that had built to a peak and was now understanding what its longer shape would be, one that had been building invisibly and was now arriving at the moment the wider world could see it. Both grounded in the same tradition, both produced by the same fundamental process of live work in real rooms for real audiences. The stage manager has reflected on why the exchange registered so strongly with her, given that her professional life regularly brought her into the proximity of encounters between prominent people, and why this particular exchange became the one she has described more than any other. Her answer, offered in different ways in different conversations, comes down to a quality she identifies as sincerity. Not sincerity in the general sense of meaning what you say, but sincerity in the more specific sense of saying something that you don't have to say and wouldn't say unless you meant it. Martin Lawrence had no obligation, professional or social, to say anything specific to Katt Williams about the work. The encounter in the corridor was unplanned and brief, the kind of encounter that is completely adequately resolved by an exchange of recognition and a move in the other direction. That would have been the expected behavior. That would have been the behavior that required nothing from either of them beyond the ordinary professional courtesy that the situation produced. What happened instead was something more than the expected behavior. Not dramatically more, it was still a brief exchange in a corridor, still a moment that resolved itself and allowed both men to move on, but different enough in its quality that the person who happened to be close enough to observe it has carried it forward in a way that the expected behavior would not have produced. What the stage manager witnessed that night was not a performance. It was two comedians in a hallway, without an audience, without cameras, without any of the conditions that make performance possible or necessary, and one of them saying something to the other that could only have come from the same place that both of their careers had come from. The place where the work is real, and the recognition of the work is real, and the brief exchange in a corridor between two people who understand the same thing from the inside is as real as anything that ever happened on a stage. That's the part of the story most people never heard. Not the shows, not the tours, not any of the things that happened in front of the people who bought tickets. A hallway, a stage manager, two comedians in a corridor finding, without planning to, something worth actually saying to each other.